Time is the scaffolding the thinking mind builds to steady itself, presence is the field underneath, already whole, already complete. When you sit absolutely still and let the nervous system decelerate, breath loosening the ribcage, exhale lengthening vagal tone, the brain's metronomes relax their grip on prediction. The default mode loops that constantly reconstruct a past and simulate a future begin to quiet, and with that quiet, something curious happens. Signals that normally get compressed into familiar stories are allowed to arrive as raw sensation. In that precise margin, the present stops being a thin razor between yesterday and tomorrow and becomes an atmosphere, a living medium you can feel with your entire body. Neurons that fire together wire together, but neurons that rest together retune together. When cortical chatter falls, thalamic gates open and slow oscillations couple distant regions into coherence, the orchestra stops rehearsing separate pieces and starts holding a single note. That note is not a memory and not a plan. It is a frequency signature of now. The biology of this is not mystical and yet it points to what mystics keep describing. Your prefrontal cortex, usually busy evaluating and narrating, yields part of its bandwidth. The salience network stops flagging every ping from the outside world as a potential threat. Parasympathetic dominance lets interoception rise, heartbeat becomes audible from the inside, the diaphragm draws the spine longer, the skin learns to listen. With that shift, the temporal binding window, the stretch of milliseconds in which the brain decides which events belong together, subtly widens. The world becomes smoother. Microdelays that once chopped reality into slices relax into continuity, and continuity feels like presence. In this continuity, attention is no longer a flashlight jerking from object to object, it is a field, and the field is permissive, and what appears in it is not separate from it. Physics tells you that clocks measure change in a system relative to a regular process, but nothing in the foundational equations forces a one-way arrow into your experience. Entropy increases on average in large ensembles, yes, but on the scale of perception the arrow of time is largely manufactured by habits of mind. When you train attention to rest, the forward lean of anticipation lessens, and with it the constant contraction that makes the future feel urgent and the past feel heavy. In alpha and theta rhythms, networks that normally segregate can synchronize, hippocampal indexing of experience becomes less about filing and more about integrating. Memory stops being a museum and becomes a studio, where the brushstrokes of sensation and meaning are laid down at the same moment. Creation and recollection blur into one act. This is not denial of history, it is refusal to keep rehearsing an identity whose only proof is repetition. The present is not a point, it is a bandwidth. You can expand that bandwidth by teaching the body to feel safe while unguarded. Safety is not the absence of danger, it is the presence of capacity. When the diaphragm moves like a tide and the jaw unhooks and the eyes soften out of foveal hunting into panoramic receiving, the brainstem reads a simple message: we are not being chased. In that message is permission to allocate energy to growth and repair. In that allocation, the chemistry of the moment changes, less cortisol drag, more nitric oxide bloom, better perfusion, cleaner signal to noise. With cleaner signals, the cortex can sense subtler differences, and with subtler differences, old categories lose their tyranny. You are no longer compelled to call every sensation fear, every tightness story, every silence lack. Subtlety introduces choice, and choice in the present is freedom from time because it is freedom from compulsion. Consider resonance. Two systems exchange energy most efficiently when their frequencies align. The nervous system is such a system, and so is your environment of relationships, tasks, and symbols. When you organize your interior around presence rather than narrative, you alter your resonance profile. People and possibilities that require your old rhythm, urgency, scarcity, self-doubt, find less coupling to latch onto. Opportunities that match coherence, clarity, steadiness, curiosity, recognize you faster. This is not superstition, it is impedance matching. The world does not rearrange because you demand it, it reorganizes where exchange is least lossy. Presence is low loss. In low loss states, small inputs go further, So the same action held in hurry produces friction, and the same action held in now produces glide. Glide looks like luck from the outside. From the inside, it feels like alignment. To step out of linear time, you do not escape the clock, you escape identification with the next tick. Start with sensation, because sensation lives at the same address as now. Feel the surfaces supporting you. Let the breath drop until it finds you without your help. Notice the moment when you want to improve the moment, then delay improvement by one breath. In that single postponement, the compulsion engine misses a stroke. Miss enough strokes and the engine stalls. In the quiet that follows, perception stops trying to be useful and starts being accurate. Accuracy is not cold, it is intimate. You notice the grain in the air, the warmth behind the sternum, the faint hum in the hands. The mind wants to name this calm, but calm is just one costume. Beneath it is availability. Availability to what? To what is actually here. As availability grows, you will encounter the memory of yourself as a timeline. This happened to me, therefore I am this kind of person. Gently, you can watch that architecture without rushing to evict it. Identities are like castings made from the molten metal of experience. Presence heats the metal again. Given warmth, a fixed edge softens, a corner rounds, a gap fills without your forcing. Biology participates. Synapses long strengthened by rehearsal are no longer fed, while new tracks open across silent tissue. A different ensemble synchronizes. You recognize options that used to be invisible because you were defending yesterday. You let a conversation end earlier. You speak a boundary without bracing. You choose to rest without apology. Each micro-act deposits evidence that the present can carry you. Evidence builds trust, and trust is the nervous system's word for faith. If the present is bandwidth, creativity is what moves through it when resistance drops. This is why solutions arrive in showers and walks, and after surrender, the prefrontal plans stop monopolizing and the whole brain votes. Subcortical pattern libraries contribute. The cerebellum offers timing. The right temporal lobe throws in metaphors. The immune system, too, listens. Inflammation is not just damage repair but a storyteller about how safe the world is. Give it the chemistry of now and it updates its plot. The heart's variability becomes flexible, the rhythm stops marching and starts dancing. Variability is health because variability is choice. Choice is what time takes from you when fear is driving. Presence restores it by returning you to the seat of agency, the place where you can decide without racing ahead to the penalty or retreating into the alibi. What, then, is the method? Not striving. Not collecting techniques like charms. It is the art of subtraction. Remove one layer of urgency. Remove one layer of commentary. Remove one layer of effort. Not forever, just for this breath. The nervous system registers this as a successful experiment in being unguarded and not dying. It will let you try again. Repetition without pressure becomes conditioning. Conditioning without story becomes character. Character aligned with presence becomes a tuning fork for reality. The fork does not force the room to vibrate, it invites. Enough invitation and the room forgets how to be discordant. You do not need to abolish calendars. You need to stop making an identity out of what the calendar says about you. There is only this breath and the patterns it invites to synchronize. There is only this moment and the permission it gives matter to assemble around your attention. When attention is scattered, matter scatters with it. When attention coheres, matter finds its form. That is the quiet alchemy, not the domination of the future but the dissolution of the story that the future holds your life. Your life is right here, not hiding behind minutes. If you can feel the precise sensation of the next inhale forming before it arrives, if you can watch the mind reach for a narrative and choose to give it warmth instead of fuel, if you can let one heartbeat be enough evidence that you are inside the field you keep trying to find, then linear time loosens and the present reveals itself as the only door you ever needed. Notice the impulse to measure progress while you practice presence. That impulse is itself a residue of linear time, a requirement that the moment justify itself by improving the next. You can meet that requirement with a simple experiment: trade outcomes for parameters. Instead of asking, "Did this work?" ask, "What is the amplitude and clarity of awareness right now?" Engineers stabilize oscillators by tuning gain and feedback. You stabilize attention by regulating breath depth and exhale to inhale ratio, eye gaze, peripheral versus foveal, skeletal tone in the pelvic floor and jaw, and the cadence of internal speech. Each parameter alters the network dynamics of the brainstem, insula, and prefrontal cortex. As these stabilize, the system stops ringing with prediction error and settles into a clean limit cycle we call presence. In that cycle, the smallest sensations become high-resolution carriers for meaning, not because they point to a story but because they are already complete. The felt sense of eternity is not an escape hatch from responsibility, it is the context in which action loses friction. When the mind is not dragging a heavy past or sprinting toward a scripted future, motor planning simplifies. Reaction time doesn't just get faster, it gets more appropriate. The cerebellum refines timing against real inputs rather than imagined ones. You step sooner, say less, and the world gives you cleaner feedback. Clean feedback shortens learning loops. Short learning loops produce confidence that is not bravado but calibration. Calibration is love made practical, the willingness to meet what is, exactly as it is, and still choose skillfully. Consider memory again, this time as a living index rather than a warehouse. The hippocampus binds experience to context, place, scent, tone, so it can be reassembled later. Under stress, this binding becomes sticky for threat and slippery for beauty. Under presence, the glue evens out. You remember what helps rather than only what hurt. Reconsolidation, the process by which a retrieved memory becomes writable, opens a window for revision. In now, you can recall an old scene and breathe differently while holding it. Autonomic patterns that used to freeze can thaw inside the same image. When the memory reshelves, it carries a new physiological signature. You didn't change the past. You changed the nervous system that keeps recreating it. That is a lawful miracle. On the physics side, call it alignment with boundary conditions. The equations that describe evolution of a system often require initial and final constraints. The real world feels like it flows from initial conditions only because we're embedded observers. Presence widens the observer's aperture. You begin to sense that the final constraints are the meanings you're willing to live by. If you decide that the purpose of this breath is to be fully sensed, you impose a gentle terminal boundary on the moment, dynamics reorganize to satisfy it. Muscles let go because the objective function no longer rewards bracing. Attention relaxes because vigilance is not the winning strategy. The path of least action becomes plain. You think you chose it, in truth, the system became simple enough to reveal it. When attention is coherent, symbols compress. You don't need a paragraph of self-talk to move a hand, you don't need a lifetime of justification to change a habit by 1 degree. 1 degree is enough because nonlinear systems cascade. A tiny tilt in posture changes baroreceptor input, shifts vagal tone, softens amygdala thresholds, and alters the meaning you attach to a glance from a stranger. Alter enough first moments and the story called "My Life" edits itself while you are busy being here. This is why presence feels like abundance, not because more objects appear, but because fewer are wasted by misalignment. Practice can be elegantly ordinary. Let the eyes rest in soft focus and receive the entire room at once, then add the breath until abdomen, ribs, and back move as a single wave. Count 5 exhales with a silent note of gratitude at the end of each, not as a ritual but as a punctuation mark that teaches the body the sentence is complete. After 5, open the palms and notice temperature and tingle without naming them. If a thought arrives, let it pass through the same wide aperture as the room. If an emotion arrives, feel where it lands in the body and widen a millimeter more around that region. Widening is intelligence. Intelligence is not analysis, it is capacity. You will discover that presence is not fragile. You can make a decision inside it. You can send an email, have a hard conversation, lift a weight, and the field does not vanish, it thickens. The trick is refusing to mortgage the moment for the promise of being finished. Finished is an idea the mind invented to feel safe. Safety is already present when the organism senses adequate resources. You can provide them, breath as fuel, posture as scaffolding, attention as shelter. Then action emerges as a property of the field rather than a flight from lack. Properties don't burn out, flights do. There is also an ethics in presence. When you meet someone without dragging your timeline between you, you stop negotiating with their past and start collaborating with their actual nervous system. Mirror neurons and autonomic coupling do the rest. Your steadiness becomes a regulator for both. This is not manipulation, it is hospitality. In that shared regulation, honesty becomes efficient. You can say what is true sooner because you are not pre-arguing with a future that hasn't occurred. Truth spoken from now is rarely violent, it doesn't need to be. It is specific like a measurement, not heavy like a verdict. If you want a single measurable proxy, track heart rate variability over weeks while practicing presence. Watch how the distribution widens as your system learns flexibility. Don't turn the metric into a whip, let it be a mirror. Correlate spikes in variability with moments when you felt less time-bound, deep listening, unhurried creation, connection without agenda. You're building a private dataset that trains trust. The organism learns, when we live in now, we have more choices. Given that lesson, it will choose now more often without your micromanagement. That is the sign you're becoming reliable to yourself. In the end, the formula is simple enough to be overlooked: sense more, narrate less, choose gently, repeat. Repetition braids myelin around the pathways that carry presence. The braid becomes a rope you can hold when storms of memory and prediction try to pull you back into the river of clocks. You don't need to stop the river. You need only remember there is a shore, and that shore is always one breath wide. Notice how the mind tries to convert presence into a technique with guaranteed outcomes. That move is subtle, it keeps a sliver of the future hidden behind every breath, a quiet bargain that says, "I'll be here now if it pays off later." The nervous system can feel that bargain as tension. The diaphragm stiffens a few millimeters, ocular muscles tighten toward narrow focus, and the sympathetic branch adds a trace of catecholamine to the mix. Replace the bargain with curiosity. Curiosity is metabolically cheaper than vigilance and more informative than indifference. It lets sensory cortices increase gain without increasing fear. In that state, prediction updates rapidly and gently, errors are embraced as signal rather than threat, and learning becomes continuous instead of episodic. Presence reorganizes the way you allocate precision in the brain's Bayesian machinery. Under stress, the system overweights priors, old stories dominate, and underweights incoming data, new experience is discounted. In now, precision rebalances. The world stops being forced to confirm assumptions. Interoceptive prediction errors, the mismatch between expected and felt heartbeat, breath, gut tone, are integrated rather than suppressed, and the insula refines its map of you. A refined map reduces unnecessary alarms. Fewer alarms free executive resources. Freed resources express as clarity and steadiness, which your environment recognizes as credibility even before words are spoken. The chemistry is cooperative. When exhale lengthens just slightly beyond inhale, baroreceptors pulse a calming rhythm to the medulla. Vagal afferents signal sufficiency, and inflammatory tone dips. Microglia, those gardeners of synapses, prune less in panic and more in wisdom. Sleep deepens not because you force it but because the organism reads the day's signals and concludes that repair is permitted. The following morning, theta bursts in hippocampus coordinate more cleanly with neocortical ripples, consolidation of what matters outcompetes rumination about what doesn't. You call it waking up refreshed. Biologically, it is a vote by your cells for the policy of presence. There is physics in your posture. A spine that stacks allows pressure to propagate like sound in a tuned instrument. A spine that collapses scatters energy into noise. When you sit or stand with effortless length, sternum soft, sacrum heavy, head floating, the body reduces shear and torque. Proprioceptors feed a coherent stream into the cerebellum, and fine motor control improves. The subjective correlate is dignity without drama. You are not holding yourself together. You are exposing the structure that was always capable of holding you. Structure is not rigidity, it is permission for flow. Attention in now is not blank, it is discriminating. You begin to sense micro-intentions forming before they eclipse the horizon of action, the twitch to check a device, the lean to interrupt, the breath that would turn a sentence into a defense. Catching an intention at that premotor stage is not suppression, it is authorship. You can let it pass or bless it into motion. Either way, you learn that freedom sits upstream from behavior, not downstream from justification. The prefrontal cortex likes this kind of education. It stops spending so much glucose on narrative control and starts investing in timing and selection. Fewer moves, better placed. Relationships transform because nervous systems entrain. Coherence is contagious. If you pair presence with clean boundaries, you become simultaneously easier and harder to move. Easier, because there is less friction born of defensiveness, harder, because there is less slack born of people-pleasing. Others feel a difference they cannot name, conversations land sooner, repairs happen faster, resentment finds no oxygen. You haven't become colder, you've become simpler to parse. Simplicity reduces the energy cost of connection, and living systems prefer low-cost channels. This is why presence subtly improves luck, more channels stay open longer. Notice, too, how creativity shifts from extraction to emergence. Extraction asks, what can I get from this moment? Emergence asks, what wants to appear if I stop crowding the space? In emergence, the brain's default and task networks alternate gracefully instead of fighting for control. Ideas arise with intact somatic signatures, you can feel which ones carry vitality and which are clever but dead. You choose the living ones. Projects accelerate, not because you push harder, but because dead branches are pruned at conception. If you want a concrete drill, try time dilation by sensation density. Pick a neutral daily activity, washing hands, tying shoes, boiling water. During that minute, increase the number of distinct sensations you can register: texture, temperature gradients, sound reflections, weight shifts, microsense. Do not name, count by feeling. More samples per unit clock time equals a thicker moment. Thick moments accumulate into days that feel surprisingly full without being busy. This is how presence cheats the scarcity of hours. It increases the information content of experience without increasing strain. As your practice matures, you may meet old pain. Presence will not collude with avoidance. It will ask you to sense the precise contour of grief, anger, or fear without annotation. This is metabolically demanding at first, the organism expects punishment after exposure. Offer resources in advance: warmth, posture, breath, another human if needed. Then feel the wave through to completion. The completion signal is unmistakable: a drop, a yawn, a tremor, a spontaneous inhale that feels like fresh territory. What was trauma shifts identity into energy that needed finishing. The past loses its claim on interest payments. The spiritual language for all of this says the now is sacred. The scientific language says you are optimizing prediction, energy usage, and social signaling under uncertainty. Both point to the same operational fact: when you stop mortgaging attention to imaginary futures, you reclaim bandwidth to meet reality with accuracy and care. Accuracy without coldness, care without collapse. That is the workable miracle. Time loosens because compulsion loosens, and the present reveals an amplitude that was always here, asking only to be felt. Presence also edits perception at the level of microtime. During each saccade your brain briefly suppresses visual input and stitches the world together afterward. This chronostasis makes the first moment after a glance feel longer than it is. Under stress, the stitching is coarse and the world looks jumpy. In calm, the stitching is fine and events flow. You don't change the physics, you change temporal resolution by changing state. The more stable your internal metronome, the less your brain must guess between frames. Guessing drops, clarity rises, and the compulsion to race ahead eases because reality stops arriving as a series of emergencies. Consider the free energy principle as a practical koan. Organisms survive by minimizing surprise. You can do that by overfitting priors, forcing experience to match old maps, or by increasing sensory precision so your maps update gracefully. Presence chooses the second path. Breath as a slow carrier signal, posture as antenna geometry, gaze as bandwidth control, together they raise the signal to noise of now. With better signal, you don't have to bully the world into sameness. You can let novelty instruct you without interpreting it as threat. This is why genuine calm is not passive, it's metabolically savvy. It saves glucose by reducing costly corrections downstream. Your heart participates as a timing drum. Beat-to-beat variability forms a fractal pattern rather than a perfect clock. That controlled irregularity, the 1/F texture of healthy systems, gives you flexibility to meet changing demands. Presence moves HRV toward that sweet complexity, neither chaotic nor rigid. On the felt level, that complexity is the capacity to pivot without panic and to hold course without stubbornness. You sense when to speak and when to wait, not as a rule but as resonance. The next right move has an obvious weight. Memory and imagination also realign. The hippocampus hosts place cells and time cells that build maps of where and when. In hypervigilance, time cells fire like a drumroll pushing you forward. In presence, their rhythm re-enters the ensemble instead of dominating it. You still plan, but planning becomes a view from the shore rather than a compulsion to swim against the river. During quiet rest, replay and preplay sequences in hippocampus sketch possibilities. Hold now with kindness and those sketches become creative without being anxious. You feel the difference, scenarios arrive as options, not ultimatums. Creativity loves stochastic resonance, the way a touch of noise can amplify a weak signal. When your state is kind, background noise from body and world stops being interference and starts being context. The smell in the room, a filament of sound from the street, the texture of light on a wall, tiny inputs that would be filtered out in hurry become cues that unlock associations. Default and executive networks dance instead of argue. Ideas appear with somatic truth built in, you don't have to talk yourself into them. Presence is not empty, it is tuned receptivity. Ethics deepens because precision allocation is moral. Overweighting priors creates prejudice, overweighting prediction errors creates panic. Presence balances the two. You meet people as signals, not stereotypes, while staying resourced enough to say no when needed. Boundaries from presence are clear and warm, specific about behavior, generous about essence. Others feel safe to be information rather than threat, which invites honesty. Honesty shortens loops of harm. The nervous system recognizes this economy and calls it relief. Try a drill in micro-authorship. Several times a day, pause one heartbeat before any habitual act, opening a message, taking a bite, replying to a tone. In that single heartbeat, register 3 sensations: contact, temperature, internal movement. Then proceed. You are not delaying for drama, you are inserting authorship upstream from behavior. Over weeks, this one-beat authorship becomes a synaptic preference. The organism learns a new default: we choose first, then act, rather than, we act and explain later. Time feels wider because you reclaim the upstream moment where freedom lives. There is posture-level physics to walking, too. Let your arms swing naturally, eyes in peripheral reception, jaw unhitched, exhale fractionally longer. Within a minute, vestibular and visual streams synchronize, the cerebellum reduces corrective micromotions, stride regularity increases. Subjectively, the world stops rushing past and begins moving with you. That witness is a signature of presence, low friction between action and environment, less waste heat in the psyche. Many call it flow. Flow is not an exotic peak, it's ordinary coherence minus self-interruption. On the quantum side, you don't need metaphors of particles obeying your thoughts to taste mystery. Decoherence reminds us that what we can call a classical outcome appears when a system couples to an environment and alternatives lose phase relation. In lived terms, outcomes solidify when attention and context settle enough to stop scattering. Presence is a human-scale decoherence. You and your surroundings couple coherently, and possibilities condense into usable reality with less noise. You don't force an outcome, you reduce phase smear by lowering internal turbulence, and the next stable state emerges where uncertainty was previously amplified by fear. Language adapts as well. Narrative density thins, specificity increases. You replace global labels, always, never, that's just me, with measurements, tightness under the ribs at the end of exhale, urge to argue rising after eye contact breaks, softness in the palms when I listen. Measurement is not cold, it is loving attention that refuses to lie. Systems reorganize around what is measured. When you measure presence, presence multiplies. When you measure hurry, hurry does, too. Choose your metric as if your life will imitate it, because it will. Sleep becomes an ally instead of a repair shop. Enter the night with one line of intention, not a demand, a boundary condition, let the organism sort and restore. Put the device away earlier than comfort suggests, let darkness be darkness so melatonin can do its simple ancient job. As you drift, imagine the day reweaving without commentary. The brain already knows how, glymphatic currents clear, spindles and ripples talk, immune patrols update their maps. Wake without searching for a narrative. Sit up, plant feet, drink water, and count 3 breaths before touching the world. You begin in authorship rather than in harvest. If you want a single litmus test, use social ease. In presence, you neither inflate nor collapse. You are findable. Others can read you because your signals match your state. Inconsistency shrinks, the gap between face and feeling, word and intention, promise and capacity. That shrinkage is not small, it is liberation. Energy once spent on maintaining masks funds curiosity, learning, and kindness. The future stops demanding tribute because you are paying attention cash, not attention debt. In all of this, remember the simplest instruction that keeps not being simple: feel the next inhale begin before it fully arrives, and let that sensation be enough proof that you are already inside the only doorway you will ever need. Hold that proof lightly. Let it educate posture, language, choices. Do it once, then once again. The rope of presence thickens strand by strand until storms forget how to pull you in. Time keeps moving on clocks. You keep meeting it from the only place that was ever real. Notice how presence changes your sense of scale. Under hurry, you inhabit narrow corridors, one problem wide, one worry tall. In now, perception regains dynamic range. You can zoom from the texture of breath across the upper lip to the arc of your life without strain. The nervous system treats that zoom as proof of capacity, it relaxes the compulsion to choose prematurely. Decisions ripen instead of being plucked green. Ripeness is efficient, fewer reversals, fewer apologies, cleaner momentum. Your metabolism learns the rhythm. Mitochondria are not just batteries, they are listeners. They upregulate output in response to demand signals, but chronic alarm blurs those signals until the throttle sticks. Presence reintroduces pulsation, periods of real exertion followed by actual off. Pulsation is nature's favorite economy: heartbeats, brain waves, tides, sleep cycles. When your life echoes that cadence, energy returns not as a reward but as a property of resonance. You stop outsourcing vitality to caffeine and conflict. Small gestures become leverage points. The way you end an exhale, the millimeter you soften behind the eyes, the microtilt of the pelvis that lengthens the lumbar curve, these are not cosmetics, they are control inputs to complex systems. A tiny bias at the right node changes global behavior. Control theory calls it leading a system by its attractor. Your attractor under presence is coherence. Coherence gathers stray behavior without policing it. Patterns fall into place because mismatch costs more than alignment. Language becomes an instrument for state regulation. Words with broad, absolute scope recruit threat networks, always, never, ruined, perfect, while words tied to measurement and locality recruit curiosity, here, now, this pressure, that sound. Choose vocabulary that increases sensor resolution and reduces moral weight. The body listens. When you say, I notice heat in the chest and a forward pull, the organism can act. When you say, I'm failing again, it can only brace. Precision is mercy. Plan from the shore of now, not from the river. Sketch intentions as vectors, direction and magnitude, rather than as brittle scripts. Vectors are robust to change, they preserve orientation through turbulence. In practice, name a quality to express, steadiness, generosity, depth, select one concrete behavior that embodies it today, and release the rest. The brain loves this three-step because it resolves ambiguity while leaving degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom are the antidote to panic. Let attention train in interleaving. Spend 2 minutes in pure interoception, breath, heartbeat, gut tone, then 2 minutes in wide exteroception, soundscape, peripheral light, room temperature, then 2 minutes in task focus, one specific problem without switching. Repeat the cycle once. This 6-minute drill teaches networks to hand the baton without dropping it. After a week, you will feel fewer stalls when you shift from solitude to conversation, from keyboard to kitchen, from planning to play. Friction shrinks because the system anticipates transitions rather than resisting them. Your sense of identity updates like a living repository. Instead of, I am anxious, adopt, our system is signaling high prediction error. That is not a dodge, it is accuracy. It invites the next question, where is the error, and what precision needs reallocation? Sometimes the fix is sensory, more contact, slower exhale. Sometimes it is social, ask for clarity instead of guessing. Sometimes it is symbolic, rename the task so the brain stops confusing it with threat. Each accurate step teaches the organism that now is workable. Workability is dignity. Presence dignifies endings. You can finish a sentence, a meal, a day without smuggling in a plea for redemption. Completion is a muscle, train it gently. When you end, really end, one breath, one soft glance around the room, one small gesture that marks closure. The nervous system records a clean musical cadence instead of a fade-out. Clean endings free bandwidth for beginnings. Bandwidth is time in felt form. What looks like no time from the outside often hides inside it an unexamined tax, rumination, rehearsal, relitigation. Presence audits that budget. You will find hours not by moving clocks but by reducing cognitive leakage. The audit is kind, not punitive. You forgive the strategies that kept you safe when options were fewer, and then you choose from a larger menu. Choosing from abundance is quieter. Quieter choices carry farther. At a certain depth, you glimpse the simplest symmetry. The moment you stop arguing with what is, you regain the power to shape what will be. Not by forcing outcomes, but by lowering distortion so the system can settle into a stable, generous next state. The breath arrives, you meet it. A thought arises, you let it show its data before you hire it as policy. A person appears, you meet the nervous system, not your forecast. The present stops being a waiting room and becomes the workshop where reality is assembled, piece by precise piece, without hurry, without debt. Presence refines taste. Not taste as preference, but as the organism's ability to discern what is truly nourishing. Under speed, stimulation masquerades as nutrition, the system chases intensity because intensity is easy to detect. In now, subtlety becomes legible. You feel the difference between fuel and friction, between a conversation that leaves residue and one that leaves space, between work that extracts and work that expresses. The gut's enteric network contributes its quiet vote, motility smooths, enzymes time their release, appetite becomes a calibration rather than a craving. Decisions that used to require discipline start making themselves because the body recognizes what fits. Attention learns to cooperate with uncertainty. The mind's old contract with the future was control, the new contract is coordination. You don't need to predict every wave when you can surf with competent balance. Competence here is not heroic, it's the accumulation of microstabilities, breath that recovers quickly after surprise, gaze that widens instead of narrows, language that samples before it concludes. With each microstability, the perceived cost of novelty falls. Lower cost means more exploration means richer maps mean fewer crises manufactured by ignorance. Uncertainty stops being a cliff and becomes a landscape. Presence rehabilitates boredom. What used to feel empty becomes a lab where your system retunes without your meddling. In that lab, the brain's spontaneous activity is not noise, it's maintenance, testing, and recombination. You can watch ideas collide gently and stick without forcing them. The default mode network, left to its healthy pace, doesn't drown you in rumination, it weaves autobiographical memory into coherent narratives that relieve the need to keep explaining yourself. Coherent narratives are light to carry. The social nervous system flowers when it isn't conscripted by performance. You recognize the micro yes and micro no inside your body and speak them early. Early is kind. It prevents the buildup of pressure that turns a simple boundary into a dramatic event. Eyes meet longer, laughter returns faster, silences stop being threats and start being invitations. Synchrony shows up in small ways, matching breath rhythms, conversational turns that land without overlap, shared attention that needs no commentary. These are not just niceties, they are metabolic efficiencies. Cooperation costs less than defense. Let the body memorize exits from familiar cul-de-sacs. If anger spikes, drop your exhale 2 counts and let the jaw soften at the hinges. If shame rises, lift the sternum a finger's width and widen your peripheral field until you can see both hands at once. If freeze arrives, press both feet evenly and name 5 textures without judgment. These are not hacks, they are reintroductions to doors you forgot you had. Each successful exit writes synaptic notes that the system can read later under load. Over time, the exits become streets, and the streets become avenues, and the city of your responses grows breathable. Presence trims superstition from effort. You stop adding extra tension, just in case. Muscles contract only as much as required for the task. The surplus, once spent on bracing, reappears as fine control, endurance, and mood. In this economy, practice beats talent, because practice is how tissues vote for tomorrow. You become trustworthy to yourself not by grand vows but by thousands of small kept promises. Drink water, finish the breath, close the loop, rest when the signal says rest. Trust collapses the need for constant negotiation. The mind is free to think because it is not busy checking whether the body will show up. Creativity scales with kindness toward your own drafts. The first version of anything is the nervous system testing a corridor. If you punish tests, you shrink exploration. If you bless them, you inherit options. Blessing is not indulgence, it is accurate accounting. It says, this corridor showed me what doesn't fit, that is value. With that accounting, iteration accelerates. You stop confusing speed with haste. Speed is clean vectoring toward what works, haste is noise injected into every step. Let attention practice amplitude modulation. Spend a minute amplifying one sensation until it becomes vivid, perhaps the coolness at the nostrils on inhale, then a minute dampening it until it recedes into the background hum. Switch signals, pick a sound in the room, then a pressure point where the body meets the chair, then the glow behind closed eyes. Learn that you can raise and lower the gain without losing the signal. This teaches regulation without suppression and intensity without compulsion. People who can modulate gain suffer less from both overwhelm and numbness. Presence clarifies ambition. Wanting is not the problem, confusion about what you actually want is. When you are here, the signal of genuine aspiration separates from the static of borrowed goals. You can feel which pursuits thicken the moment and which thin it. Pursuits that thin the moment are taxes disguised as glory. You need fewer of them than you think. The ones you keep will ask for work, but the work will resemble breathing, effort with recovery built in, rather than holding your breath for years. A final practice hides in plain sight, completion rituals for micro-wins. After you send a message you were delaying, after you return to breath in the middle of a loop, after you meet someone's eyes and stay kind, mark it. One unclenched hand, one longer exhale, one whispered, "That's like us." The nervous system learns through rewards that match the scale of the action. Over time, your identity updates to "we finish" and "we return." Time respects identities like that. It stops threatening you with scarcity because you keep demonstrating sufficiency, right where you are, in the only laboratory that was ever open, this breath, this body, this unmistakable now. Presence upgrades how you budget entropy. Under hurry, you spend your limited order on managing imagined futures and cleaning up after impulsive choices. In now, entropy is invested where it compounds, sensing, timing, and repair. You make fewer messes and recover faster from the ones you do make. The brain's temporal discounting, the tendency to overvalue immediate relief, softens because the body feels sufficiently resourced in the present. When sufficiency is sensed, you can wait without strain. Waiting without strain is strategic power, it lets better options reveal themselves on their own clock. Decision-making becomes a study in signal fidelity. Most bad choices are not moral failures, they are selections made from noisy data. Presence lowers internal noise so the value function you use to rank options matches reality more closely. The anterior cingulate stops firing like a car alarm and returns to its proper job, detecting true conflict rather than narrating constant crisis. You can sense when two good values collide and design around the collision, sequence them, blend them, or decline one with clean regret. Regret, when clean, teaches precision, when dirty, it teaches avoidance. Your perception of effort reframes from strain to coordination. Strain is what happens when subsystems pull in different directions. Breath says slow, language says rush, posture says hide, intention says show. Coordination is those same parts agreeing on a direction long enough to act. Presence hosts the negotiation in real time. You feel the micro-veto in the diaphragm and let it inform pacing. You notice the jaw wanting armor and soften it a degree. You pick words that fit the available breath. With fewer internal crosswinds, the same work feels lighter because less energy is lost to cancellation. Attention learns to ride thresholds. Between not enough stimulation and too much stimulation lies a narrow ridge where learning is fastest and experience is richest. Presence puts you on that ridge more often by making you sensitive to early signs of drift, eyes narrowing, shoulders sneaking toward the ears, inner speech accelerating. You correct at centimeter scale instead of waiting for a cliff. Small corrections are cheap and frequent, cliffs are rare and costly. Over time, stability stops meaning no change and starts meaning fast, kind adaptation. Even your relationship with technology changes. Devices are not enemies, they are amplifiers. When attention is scarce, amplification spreads scarcity. When attention is coherent, amplification spreads coherence. Presence turns notifications into negotiated inputs rather than compulsory triggers. You decide which channels are allowed to enter the nervous system and on what schedule. The prefrontal cortex appreciates the respect, it spends less time on inhibition and more on selection. Selection is creative, inhibition is exhausting. Practice presence in contexts that used to guarantee collapse. Take a difficult conversation and set 2 private constraints. You will breathe fully through the entire reply, and you will name one concrete observation before any interpretation. That single sensory anchor, tone, pace, posture, exact words, keeps the neocortex online. The amygdala sees that reality is being measured and downgrades the alert. Measured reality is workable, generalized threat is not. Workable conversations end sooner and bind stronger, they do not require epilogues of rumination. Let the day be punctuated by resets rather than marathons. 90 minutes of focus followed by 5 minutes of pure sensing is not a hack, it is an echo of ultradian rhythms. During the 5, drop the project, widen gaze, feel feet, let exhale lengthen. You are not taking a break, you are switching control mode so the brain can consolidate, the lymph can move, and micro-errors can be corrected before they snowball. Most burnout is not caused by too much work but by too little recovery woven into the work. Presence also recalibrates courage. Fear is not the problem, misread fear is. In now, you can parse the signal, excitement plus uncertainty, without falling into the story that you are in danger. The sympathetic surge becomes fuel for precision rather than a command to flee. Courage stops being the suppression of fear and becomes the accurate use of it. Accurate fear sharpens edges, clarifies stakes, and then steps aside when the move is made. Train a micro-retreat at the edges of sleep. As you lie down, let the breath find a 1-to-1 ratio, then 1 minute and 1.2 seconds, letting exhale drift a hair longer. Scan from crown to soles with the lightest possible touch, not hunting for tension but greeting what appears. If a worry arrives, convert it into a boundary condition, let the system sort this while I rest. You are not solving, you are instructing. The instruction allows deeper stages to take over. In the morning, begin with 3 slow inhales before language. Language entering a regulated field behaves like a tool, language entering a frantic field behaves like a weapon. When setbacks come, and they will, you can metabolize them instead of mythologizing them. Name what actually failed: timing, resources, skill, luck. Each belongs to a solvable class. Timing is sequencing, resources are logistics, skill is training, luck is variance. Presence refuses to let a specific miss balloon into a global identity. This refusal is not denial, it is engineering. You fix the subsystem that needs fixing and keep the rest of the machine online. Keep a tiny ledger of sufficiency. Not grand gratitudes, micro-sufficiencies, the exact feel of one clear inhale after a difficult email, the moment your shoulders dropped on a walk, the clean end to a call. Write one line, no flourish. The ledger teaches the organism where to look for evidence that life is workable. Systems move toward the signals they are trained to notice. Train for sufficiency and you will find it more often, not by wish but by measurement. In the quietest moments, test the simplest proposition: the present is not a means, it is the medium. When you treat it that way, time stops being a corridor to sprint and becomes a studio to inhabit. Work still happens. Plans still exist. But the identity doing the work is not debtor to the future, it is a craftsperson shaping reality with steady hands, clean breath, and a nervous system that knows the difference between urgency and aliveness. Presence upgrades your tolerance for partial information. Under linear time's pressure, gaps feel like threats and you rush to fill them with guesses. In now, gaps become containers where better data can arrive. The nervous system learns to leave variables unassigned without freezing. This is statistical maturity embodied, the willingness to hold a posterior distribution rather than demand a single point estimate. From that stance, you act with provisional precision, updating gracefully as evidence changes. Life stops being a sequence of overconfident commitments and becomes a series of well-timed refinements. Even motivation shifts texture. Drive fueled by deficiency burns hot and erratic, drive fueled by coherence burns steady and clean. The mesolimbic system still delivers dopamine, but the cue is progress through a meaningful vector rather than random novelty. You experience wanting and liking recoupling after years of drift. The result is stamina without self-abandonment. You can do hard things because the organism trusts the steward at the helm. Presence reduces hidden transaction costs. Every time you brace before speaking, you pay a tax. Every time you rehearse an argument after it ends, you pay again. When you meet the moment without hedging, interactions settle at their natural price. Some are expensive, fine, you invest. Some are cheap, good, you don't inflate them. This accurate pricing quiets resentment and returns working capital to attention. With capital free, generosity stops feeling risky. Precision in language continues to unlock physiology. Swap always overwhelmed for rapid heartbeat and tunnel vision after 3 back-to-back tasks. The first statement recruits identity and helplessness, the second recruits action, widen gaze, extend exhale, insert a reset. This is operational compassion, feelings honored, mechanisms engaged. Over days, the body learns that naming specifics reliably yields workable moves. Confidence becomes empirical, not motivational. Practice microsynchrony with the world. When you lift a cup, time the inhale to the moment the rim touches the lip. When you place your feet on the floor in the morning, wait until you can sense both soles equally and then stand. When you greet someone, let your breath finish before your first word. These tiny alignments teach the system that coordination is available at will. Coordination compacts time because it reduces rework. Fewer slips, fewer do-overs, cleaner arcs of action. Your relationship to failure becomes precise. Instead of, I blew it, you can say, my sampling rate dropped and I missed a cue. The fix writes itself, raise sensory gain earlier next time, shorten the decision horizon, or add a checkpoint. This is not euphemism, it is engineering clarity that keeps self-respect intact while you iterate. Respect sustains curiosity, curiosity sustains learning, learning sustains presence. The loop closes toward competence instead of shame. Let attention train on latency. Pick a signal, the first hint of impatience, the micro-flinch before a notification, and see how soon you can detect it. Shave milliseconds by sensing upstream precursors, jaw micro-clench, narrowing pupils, breath pause. As latency shrinks, freedom expands, because authorship lives earlier than behavior. You are moving your choice point closer to the source. The subjective effect is more time without adding hours, agency arriving sooner than habit. Presence also cleans diet at the level of information. Junk inputs, doom scrolls, outrage bait, gossip, lose their grip because you can feel their aftertaste in real time, scattered gaze, shallow breath, restless palms. Replace them with nutrient-dense signals, long-form attention, measured conversation, nature's uncompressed textures. The nervous system recalibrates to higher fidelity streams, and low-grade noise stops satisfying. This is taste as neuroplastic outcome. When you plan, do it with dynamic constraints rather than rigid scripts. Name the non-negotiables, sleep window, movement, deep work block, real connection, and let the rest flow. The system learns that guardrails are gifts, not prisons. Within them, spontaneity thrives and you produce at a surprisingly humane pace. Humane pace is not slow, it is sustainable acceleration. You cover distance because you're not burning bearings. Close loops on purpose. Every unfinished task occupies working memory and leaks catecholamines. Adopt a ritual to mark completion, a single breath while looking at the finished thing, a touch of the desk, a quiet, done. It sounds ceremonial, it is neurological housekeeping. The prefrontal cortex gets its confirmation signal and releases the thread. Over time, cognitive debt shrinks, and presence shows up unencumbered. Keep testing the simplest invariant, reality improves its cooperation as you lower internal friction. Friction falls when sensing precedes speaking, when breath sets tempo, when posture carries weight instead of story, when boundaries are voiced early and kind. Do this in small pieces, repeatedly, until the body stops treating presence as a special state and starts recognizing it as home. Clocks will keep ticking, seasons will keep turning. But the felt sense of life will belong to the only dimension that ever allowed you to touch it, this precise, vivid, generous now. Presence refines how you carry tension across time. Much of what feels like stress about tomorrow is unprocessed activation from 5 minutes ago still echoing through musculature and breath. When you close micro loops as they arise, one long exhale after sending a message, one posture reset after standing up, one glance to widen the visual field before you speak, you prevent yesterday from masquerading as tomorrow. The hypothalamus reads the pattern shift and adjusts hormonal set points accordingly. Cortisol peaks become narrower, catecholamine spikes resolve faster, and baseline returns with less negotiation. You are not tougher, you are cleaner. Accuracy in sensing converts worry into work. Anxiety is often unlabeled energy searching for a job. Give it one. If you detect a global unease, localize it, map the precise square centimeters involved, under the left clavicle, across the diaphragm's right dome, behind the eyes. Assign a concrete task to each region, exhale longer through the ribs, soften ocular focus, let the tongue rest heavy at the floor of the mouth. The organism recognizes actionable specificity and downshifts. Vague alarms require stories, precise signals invite skill. Presence also upgrades tempo control. Under compulsion, tasks inherit a single pace, too fast. In now, you regain the whole tempo palette. Some moves prefer largo, reading hard research, repairing trust, grieving. Others need allegro, catching a bus, intercepting a spill, saying yes before the window closes. Training the nervous system to switch tempo on purpose increases throughput without increasing wear. Throughput rises because mode switches are smooth, wear falls because you stop grinding one gear. Your attention learns to respect refractory periods. Every cognitive act leaves a brief window where repeating it yields diminishing returns. Neural circuits need milliseconds to reset ion gradients and seconds to restabilize ensembles. In hurry, you ignore these refractory periods and call the resulting errors lack of discipline. In presence, you place micropauses at natural edges, after sending, after deciding, after finishing a paragraph, and the next act lands sharper. This is not mysticism, it is electrophysiology applied to daily life. Let environment be a co-regulator rather than a background. A cool splash on wrists shifts baroreflex tone, a view that includes horizon reduces amygdala load compared to close walls, textured natural sound, wind, leaves, distant water, offers stochastic inputs that stabilize attention without hijacking it. Treat light like a hormone, morning brightness to anchor circadian clocks, dim amber light to signal melatonin's runway. Presence is not isolated willpower, it is intelligent coupling with context. Negotiation with yourself gets simpler. Instead of promises, I will never, or bargains, if I use constraints stated as present tense capacities, I can hold 3 priorities today, I can write for 45 minutes before the next reset, I can meet conflict and keep breath continuous. Constraints are generous because they tell the truth about bandwidth, they also paradoxically expand bandwidth by removing meta-arguments. The system stops spending cycles on whether you should have infinite capacity and starts expressing the capacity you actually have. Practice temporal composure in tight windows. When a deadline approaches, most systems collapse precision to buy speed. Presence does the opposite, it increases precision to protect speed. Narrow your visual task to one rectangle on the screen, return the breath to an even 1:1 or 1 minute and 1.2 seconds ratio, and reduce internal speech to verbs only, write, check, send, save. Verbs cut cognitive drag. With drag reduced, velocity rises without panic. Finishing from composure leaves no residue, finishing from frenzy leaves a hangover that taxes the next task. Your immune system listens to the story the nervous system tells about time. Chronic, not yet safe, signals tilt the balance toward surveillance and away from repair, presence tilts it back without turning off vigilance. You are not suppressing defenses, you are calibrating them. Cytokine tone lowers, sleep architecture deepens, tissue repair catches up. This is why simple embodied practices appear to improve mood and patience. You are literally less inflamed. Less inflammation is less misinterpreted signal. Less misinterpreted signal is a kinder world. Let choice become an operation, not a drama. Build a two-stage selection, sensing then deciding. Stage 1, gather 3 concrete observations relevant to the choice: available time, energy rating, the single most constraining dependency. Stage 2, pick the smallest action that advances the vector and is guaranteed to complete in the present block. Then execute without commentary. Commentary steals energy from execution and spends it on identity theater. Execution taught as a quiet reflex gives the future back to itself. Presence reduces superstition around luck by clarifying leverage. You notice that the lucky break often arrives in moments when friction is already low: inbox triaged, body moved, sleep intact, boundary expressed early, one courageous message sent yesterday. This stack is not control, it is alignment. Aligned stacks refract randomness in your favor by making you ready when variance swings your way. Readiness is not tension, it is contact with reality plus spare capacity. Train a closing ritual for each day that returns the mind from timeline to medium. 2 minutes. Write 1 line naming what you actually moved, 1 line naming what moved you, and 1 line naming one thing you can safely let tomorrow decide. Then a breath standing, eyes soft, shoulders unhitched. You are teaching the organism to end without hoarding. Days that end clean begin clean, beginnings compound. In the deepest sense, presence is ecological. It tunes you to flows, air, light, conversation, attention, so that you draw what you need and return what you don't without turbulence. Systems around you respond by lowering their own guard. Work becomes collaboration with constraints. Love becomes accurate welcome. Learning becomes faster because error isn't punished, it's metabolized. Time continues to mark change, but it no longer owns the meaning of your life. Meaning emerges from contact, and contact is available only here, where the breath you are already breathing meets the moment you are already in, and the nervous system, relieved of prophecy duty, remembers how to be wise. Presence upgrades your boundary intelligence. In biology, a Markov blanket separates a system from its environment while allowing the right exchanges. In lived experience, that blanket is your skin, breath, posture, and language. Under rush, the blanket gets leaky where it should be selective and rigid where it should be permeable. You absorb noise and block nourishment. In now, permeability becomes skillful. You can feel inputs as they arrive, tone before words, posture before argument, light before story, and decide whether to couple or decouple. Decoupling is not withdrawal, it is choiceful gating. Choiceful gates keep signal quality high, and high-quality signal shrinks the need for drama because understanding lands on the first try. Precision with beginnings is leverage. Most spirals, good or bad, are determined in their first seconds. Train the opening move, 1 breath that matches the task, 1 orientation that fits the room, 1 sentence that names what is observable. Starting a meeting. I'm noticing we have 40 minutes and 3 decisions. Starting a workout. I'm feeling hips and feet, tempo even. Beginning a creative block. I'm holding 2 drafts and choosing 1. These micro-prologues instruct the nervous system to align around measurement rather than myth. Measured starts produce clean arcs compress time without stealing from recovery. The cerebellum, your master of timing and prediction error, thrives on rhythmic fidelity. Give it anchors, cadence in your steps, a gentle metronome in typing, breath that doesn't lurch at transitions. When cadence stabilizes, corrective micromotions fall, leaving more bandwidth for meaning. Meaning then rides on fewer, better movements. This is why presence often feels like elegance, less scatter, more intent, the same action done with 20% fewer corrections that nobody sees but everybody feels. Let attention practice, course define, scanning like a good visual algorithm. First, register the whole scene, global gist, then sweep for edges, where tension gradients are steepest, then interrogate one patch with high resolution, exact sensation, exact constraint. Course define prevents hyperfocus from missing context and prevents vagueness from masquerading as wisdom. Used in conversations, it sounds like, big picture, here's what I hear, the sticking point seems to be timeline, specifically, the dependency is X on Y. The nervous system hears that reality is being mapped at the right scale and relaxes its emergency broadcasting. Presence also reassigns authorship for narratives you carry. Memory reconsolidation opens a writable window whenever a story is vividly recalled. Bring a familiar loop into now, but change the physiological backdrop, soft eyes, longer exhale, posterior chain engaged so the body feels supported. Retell the same facts with the new body state and let the scene reshelve. Next time it arises, the autonomic tag attached to it will be quieter. You did not erase history, you updated the predictive model that kept turning it into fate. On the physics side, treat your choices like path integrals. Many possible trajectories contribute, and the realized path tends to minimize action given the constraints. Presence lowers internal friction, so the path of least action becomes apparent sooner. You experience this as obviousness. What felt tangled an hour ago resolves into one or two clean moves. Obviousness is not magic, it is the reduction of internal turbulence so the system can reveal its natural gradient. Taste your inputs the way a scientist samples data. Sound with too much compression fatigues, lighting without contrast flattens mood, language with absolutes inflames, feeds engineered for outrage dysregulate. Swap in high-fidelity streams, natural light early, distant horizons at least once a day, unhurried conversations where turns are not stolen, music with dynamics. You are not being precious, you are curating the statistics your brain will use to predict the world tomorrow. Better priors, better days. Practice a 3-part reset you can deploy anywhere in under 20 seconds, orient, soften, select. Orient, widen gaze until you can sense both hands or both shoulders at once, this toggles from foveal hunting to panoramic receiving. Soften, drop the tongue, let the floor of the mouth carry the jaw, release 5% from the pelvic floor, baroreceptors will do the rest. Select, pick the single next verb and do only that. This tiny pipeline turns overwhelm into throughput by removing negotiation in the moment where negotiation costs the most. Presence clarifies the difference between intensity and depth. Intensity spikes and leaves residue, depth thickens and leaves coherence. You can feel the aftermath, intensity is buzzy and hungry, depth is quiet and fed. Choose depth where you can, deep work blocks with a clear end, deep rest without devices, deep connection that permits silence. The more your days lean toward depth, the easier it becomes to decline shallow bait without moral effort. Taste has changed, willpower is spared. Train latency to kindness. Pick one cue, frustration toward yourself, defensiveness toward another, and measure the milliseconds before you can produce a kinder microact, a slower exhale, a softer tone, a question instead of a claim. The aim is not sainthood, it is speed. Shorter latency means less damage done that later needs repair. Repair is noble, but prevention is merciful. Mercy conserves energy, conserved energy buys you better choices. Let endings be explicit, not accidental. The nervous system needs punctuation. Close a work sprint with a literal period, tap the desk, one breath, one look at the finished thing. Close a conversation with a named takeaway or a clear next touch. Close the day by placing tomorrow's top constraint on a sticky note and leaving it there, outside your head. Punctuation returns stray activation to baseline. Baseline is where learning writes itself in while you are not looking. Make friends with the body's natural oscillations rather than fighting them. Focus in waves, socialize in waves, train in waves, even reflect in waves. The alternation, on, off, narrow/wide, effort/recover, matches how neurons and hormones already move. When lifestyle echoes physiology, compliance stops being a battle because you are no longer asking biology to betray its design. You surf the grain instead of sanding against it. Presence reframes courage as precision under arousal. Let the sympathetic surge be a lens, not a judge. Keep breath continuous and language concrete while you act. Afterward, metabolize the charge, a walk that lets vestibular input rinse the brain, a few minutes of eyes closed panoramic vision, a sip of water with a slow swallow that presses the vagus. You are teaching the organism that activation can complete. Completed activation doesn't accumulate as dread, it returns as capacity. Guard your earliest minutes after waking and your final minutes before sleep like prime real estate. Upon waking, light in the eyes, water, 3 breaths before words, before sleep, dimness, 1 boundary condition for the night, let the system sort and restore, devices parked out of reach. These bookends train circadian rhythms, reduce inflammatory noise, and make presence cheaper all day because the organism trusts the cycle. Most of all, keep the contract simple: sense first, choose gently, finish clean, recover fully, repeat. The repetition is the alchemy. Myelin thickens around pathways that carry steadiness, interoception gets high resolution, social cues become legible without guesswork, and work flows because you are not secretly sprinting for a finish line that keeps moving. Time still measures change, but it stops extracting tribute. You pay in attention and receive your life back as accuracy, sufficiency, and a quiet confidence that whatever arrives will find you here, available, coordinated, and ready.